Imagine this: a black woman stands tall in a courtroom, fighting for justice, only to be silenced and escorted out. But then, a single phone call from the White House turns everything upside down. Stay tuned to Adam Alpha to find out how one woman's courage sparked a movement. Cop tries to remove black woman from court. Then, a call from the White House changes everything. "Ma'am, you need to leave now." The officer's sharp command echoed through the tense courtroom. Teresa Marshall stood her ground, gripping her legal documents as murmurs spread through the crowd. "I have the right to be here," she said firmly, refusing to back down. The judge's gavel slammed. "Not anymore. Bailiff, remove her." Sergeant Kyle Harrington stepped forward, ready to escort her out. But before he could lay a hand on her, the courtroom doors burst open. A breathless clerk rushed in, holding a folded note. "Your Honor," the clerk's voice wavered, "there's a call for you, from the White House." The room fell into stunned silence. The judge hesitated. The officer froze. And in that moment, Teresa knew everything was about to change. Wait. How does a single call from Washington flip an entire courtroom on its head? Keep watching Adam Alpha to uncover the shocking twist that changed history. The courthouse in Shady Grove, Maryland, was a swirl of anxious energy that Tuesday morning. People formed lines along the polished marble floors, each waiting for their turn before a judge known for an icy stare and a penchant for swift judgments. The black metal detectors beeped incessantly, scanning each person's bag and body for the slightest signs of contraband. From the outside, the building radiated the timeless authority of the legal system: grand columns, massive wooden doors, and an American flag swaying in the gentle breeze. Inside, though, was a boiling pot of fear, tension, and desperation. Young lawyers rushed by in crumpled suits, files and briefcases pressed to their chests. Families huddled in corners, whispering prayers for leniency. The courthouse staff typed away at a furious pace, updating records, answering phone calls, and directing the human traffic. Signs reminded everyone to keep silent in the corridors, in futile request in the face of the countless whispered debates about bail, fines, charges, and pleas. Even the air smelled of anxiety, a mix of old paper, stale coffee, and sweaty apprehension. Amid all this rushed confusion, one figure stood out: Teresa Marshall, a tall black woman in her early 40s. She wore a modest black blazer and a white blouse, hair neatly braided, her eyes resolute yet tinged with weariness. Teresa's presence commanded attention, though she spoke quietly. She had fought many battles in her life, from a rough upbringing to countless professional struggles. Yet this moment felt heavier. She was here to testify in a civil case related to a workplace discrimination lawsuit, her own. Teresa had been terminated from a prestigious marketing firm, claiming blatant bias, and now her day in court had finally arrived. The corridors smelled of tension and official polish, like the faint odor of lemon-scented cleaner that fails to fully scrub away the underlying grime. Teresa clutched her legal documents, feeling hope and dread swirl together. She had prepared meticulously with her attorney, determined to stand up for what she believed to be right. But Teresa had no idea how drastically her life was about to change. Tucked a corner of the same hallway was an officer of the law, Sergeant Kyle Harrington, tall, muscular, with a pronounced jawline and close-cropped hair. He carried an aura of authority. Though he wasn't new to courthouse details, something in his posture that day signaled tension. Teresa noticed him glancing her way, as if singling her out from the moment she set foot in the building. The hearing was scheduled for 9:30 a.m. in room 306, a chamber known for Judge Marjorie Hessington's stringent approach. Teresa slipped into the wooden pews as her attorney, Rick Stanton, an idealistic middle-aged man known for championing civil rights cases, gave her a nod of support. The opposing counsel, representing the marketing firm, cut a stark contrast: slick hair, expensive suit, the confident smile of someone who believed he held all the cards. Before the session began, Teresa noticed Sergeant Harrington step into the courtroom. His gaze swept over the seats, ultimately landing on her. There was no immediate reason for concern. Officers often monitored proceedings to maintain decorum, yet his eyes held a certain hardness, as if anticipating something. Judge Hessington, robed in black and armed with an imposing stare, emerged from her chambers. The gavel struck, the usual formalities were exchanged. Teresa's heart pounded in her chest. She'd been waiting for this day to present her evidence and her personal testimony, proof of discriminatory emails, data showing she was passed over for promotions time and again, even though she outperformed colleagues. She wanted justice, not just for herself, but for the countless others who had been silenced by corporate machinery. As the hearing progressed, tensions rose. Teresa's lawyer presented slides of her performance reviews, glowing recommendations from former clients, and the abrupt shift in her evaluations after a new manager took over, one who had allegedly made racist remarks behind closed doors. The marketing firm's counsel sneered, picking at each piece of evidence, painting Teresa as a disgruntled employee looking for a big payout. Judge Hessington seemed unmoved by Teresa's emotional testimony. The judge's eyes flicked between the screens, the lawyers, and Teresa herself. Teresa wondered if Hessington harbored her own biases. Her expression remained cold. Gradually, an air of impatience permeated the courtroom. Teresa felt an unsettling sense that she might be fighting an uphill battle. Then came the unexpected confrontation. As Teresa finished her response to the opposing counsel's cross-examination, she requested permission to address the court again, citing new evidence. The judge, exasperated by the length of the hearing, rolled her eyes and snapped, "That's enough, Miss Marshall. You've had your time." When Teresa tried to clarify, repeating that she had crucial new emails that the defense had not disclosed, the judge's frustration flared. "I said enough." Hessington raised her voice. "If you speak again out of turn, I will have you removed from my courtroom." Something in that exchange, in Teresa's unwavering determination not to be silenced, lit a spark. Sergeant Harrington, who had been standing near the door, immediately took a step forward, as if waiting for an excuse to remove Teresa by force. Judge Hessington's patience finally snapped. She pointed a finger at Teresa and announced, "Since you cannot follow instructions, Miss Marshall, I am ordering you to leave." Her gavel slammed down again, echoing through the courtroom. An audible gasp spread among the handful of observers. Rick Stanton leaped to his feet, trying to calm the situation. He explained that Teresa was under stress, that the new evidence could turn the case around, and that there was no disrespect intended toward the court. His words fell on deaf ears. "Bailiff, remove Miss Marshall from my courtroom now," Judge Hessington declared, using the official title for the courthouse security. Sergeant Harrington took that as his cue. He advanced toward Teresa with a look that plainly revealed he was more than willing to proceed. Teresa felt her world tilt. This was her chance to finally speak on record about the injustice she had suffered. Being thrown out meant her testimony could be discredited, her evidence ignored. Desperation gripped her. She opened her mouth to protest one last time, but Sergeant Harrington loomed over her, handcuffs clinking ominously at his belt. "Ma'am," he said sternly, "you need to leave now." Rick placed a gentle hand on Teresa's shoulder. "Let's go," he whispered. "We'll figure it out. Don't make it worse." Hot tears of frustration prickled behind Teresa's eyes as she stood. She gathered her files, the meticulously prepared evidence that had suddenly become useless. The entire courtroom watched, some with pity, some with smug satisfaction. The stares weighed on her, fueling her sense of injustice. Harrington placed his hand on her upper arm, guiding her firmly toward the aisle. She felt a flush of anger. Why was it always so easy for those in power to silence black voices? The rage simmered beneath her calm exterior. She was no stranger to adversity, but this felt like a profound betrayal of the very justice system that promised to serve everyone equally. Quietly, but with a trembling dignity, Teresa walked toward the double doors. The entire fiasco had lasted mere minutes, but it felt like a lifetime's worth of humiliation. As she stepped out, Harrington's grip tightened for a moment, as if ensuring she knew she was under his control. She bristled but held her tongue. She needed to remain calm if she had any hope of salvaging her case. She could feel the eyes of the courtroom burning into her back. Little did Teresa know, the real battle was about to begin the moment she crossed the threshold. Time crawled. Harrington jotted notes on a small notepad, glancing at Teresa every so often. She resented that. It felt like he was documenting her every breath, every twitch, as though collecting evidence of her guilt where none existed. She tried to remain composed, folding her hands in her lap. Outside the courthouse windows, the day grew brighter, sunshine streaming in. Teresa marveled at how life went on as usual beyond these walls. Traffic roared by, passers-by hustled to work, to brunch, to meetings. Meanwhile, her world felt like it had come to a grinding halt. After what seemed an eternity, Harrington slipped his notepad back into his vest pocket. He straightened, as though ready to escort her out. Then, to Teresa's surprise, he spoke in a low voice, not quite apologetic, but somewhat less vicious than before. "Look, lady, you put me in a difficult spot. The judge told me to remove you. I only followed orders." Teresa studied him carefully. She recognized that excuse, a variation of "I'm just doing my job," which marginalized people had heard countless times. She resisted the urge to lash out, reminding herself that anger could be used against her. Instead, she answered calmly, "I understand you have a job to do, Sergeant. But it also matters how you do it." His features hardened again, as if his brief moment of human connection dissolved under the sense of authority. "If you have an issue, you can talk to the judge. I don't make the rules," he said, turning away. Before he could walk off completely, Teresa mustered her courage. "One day, you might be on the receiving end of injustice," she said softly. "Remember how you chose to treat people when you had power." He paused, his back to her, then continued on without replying. Teresa watched him go, feeling a swirl of pity, anger, and an odd determination. Perhaps he was just another cog in the system, but cogs can still decide how roughly they turn. She rose, gathering her documents and her battered pride. The corridor suddenly felt empty. Rick Stanton had yet to appear. Teresa still held onto a thin thread of hope that the judge might reconsider. She checked her phone, but there were no messages. Little did she know, chaos was unfolding inside the courtroom. The judge and opposing counsel were discussing the possibility of citing Teresa for contempt. Rick was vehemently protesting, brandishing the newly discovered evidence that Teresa had tried to present. His arguments escalated, and the tension was reaching a breaking point. And then, in the midst of that turmoil, something entirely unexpected happened. A call from Washington, D.C., would soon disrupt everyone's sense of normalcy. Back in room 306, chaos reigned. Rick Stanton stood at the plaintiff's table, face flushed red with anger. He pointed to the fresh emails that had recently come to light, which he argued showed beyond a doubt that Teresa was singled out by her employer due to her race. The judge, scowling, threatened to hold him in contempt next if he didn't settle down. The opposing counsel tried to seize the moment, dismissing the new documents as irrelevant or unauthenticated. Confusion swirled, with the bailiff attempting to restore order. Then, one of the court clerks burst into the room, heading straight for the bench to whisper urgently in Judge Hessington's ear. The judge's annoyed expression morphed into surprise. She swiveled her attention to the clerk, who handed her a folded note. Hesitation flickered on her face, followed by a deep furrow of her brow. She cleared her throat, pounding the gavel for silence. "We're going into recess," she declared sharply. "All parties, remain in the vicinity. This court is adjourned for a 15-minute recess." The confusion was palpable. Lawyers exchanged incredulous glances. Rick, determined to keep pushing for Teresa, tried to approach the bench, but the judge waved him off. "Counselor, I said we are in recess," she repeated. In a flurry, Judge Hessington rose and marched back to her chambers, the clerk following close behind. No one in the courtroom knew what had just happened or why the judge cut off the hearing so abruptly. The opposing counsel, who had moments before worn an air of smug satisfaction, looked just as puzzled as Rick. It wasn't until the clerk quietly slipped into the hallway and caught sight of Sergeant Harrington that the pieces started to fall into place. For Harrington, the day had been routine, though somewhat more tense than usual. The abrupt recess piqued his curiosity. "Sergeant," the clerk said, "the judge needs you in her chambers immediately." Harrington's eyebrows rose. It was unusual for the judge to summon a court security officer outside of a disciplinary matter. Without further ado, he pivoted and followed the clerk. Inside the judge's chambers, with its dark wooden furniture and shelves brimming with thick legal volumes, Hessington was on the phone, her posture rigid, her tone deferential. Yes, Mr. Secretary, she said, addressing someone on the other end of the line. I understand. Yes, I'll see to it immediately. She glanced at Harrington, who stepped in and stood at attention. Her expression was grave. After a few more curt nods and polite yes, sir, Judge Hessington ended the call. She set the receiver down carefully, as if it were a weight she could hardly bear. That was the White House, Hessington said quietly, meeting Harrington's eyes. Teresa Marshall, apparently, her case has garnered the attention of the administration. Someone very high up wants to ensure that her testimony is not cut short. Sergeant Harrington felt a jolt of disbelief. The White House? He had read about the administration's recent push for greater scrutiny of discriminatory practices, but never thought it could reach down into a single courthouse in Shady Grove. This changes things, the judge continued, her voice wavering slightly. I need you to find Miss Marshall immediately and have her brought back into the courtroom. Uncuff her if you have to. Do whatever it takes. We are to resume the hearing as soon as possible, and we are to give her every courtesy. Harrington blinked. He recalled the subdued dignity of Teresa, the frustration in her eyes, and how he had gripped her arm just minutes before. Now, he was being ordered to escort her back, not out. The irony did not escape him. Yes, Your Honor, he said, not sure how else to respond. Judge Hessington grabbed a thick file from her desk, flipping through the pages. Sergeant, I don't know what you overheard, but keep this confidential. The call was from the Secretary of the Department of Justice, who said the administration has taken an interest in Miss Marshall's case. They made it quite clear there would be consequences if Miss Marshall's right to a fair hearing was compromised. Harrington swallowed hard. This was beyond any normal procedure he had ever encountered. I'll bring her back, Your Honor, he managed to say and turned to go. His mind reeled at the sudden whiplash. One moment, he was removing Teresa from the courtroom under threat of contempt, the next, he was under direct orders via the White House to ensure she received fair treatment. The wheels of power were turning in ways no one had anticipated. Sergeant Harrington moved swiftly through the corridor, scanning for Teresa. The typical courthouse bustle was in full swing, lawyers chatting in corners, families anxiously waiting for updates. He finally caught sight of her near the exit sign, leaning against a wall with tears sliding down her cheeks. She stiffened when she saw him approaching, her expression guarded, likely expecting more harassment. Before Teresa could speak, Harrington raised a hand in a gesture that almost resembled an olive branch. Miss Marshall, he began, his voice somewhat gentler than before, you're requested back in the courtroom. Teresa blinked in disbelief, hugging her documents closer. By whom? She asked. She had no illusions about the judge's earlier anger. By the judge, Harrington answered, glancing around nervously. There's been new information. She studied him, suspecting a trap or some bureaucratic ploy. Why this sudden change? I can't say, he answered truthfully, though he didn't mention the White House call. But the hearing is resuming, and the judge specifically wants you back. Teresa glanced at the elevator and then down at her phone, which remained silent. She wondered if Rick had managed to turn things around or if some miracle had occurred. She thought of her mother's old adage, sometimes, justice comes from places you least expect. Sensing Harrington's sudden shift in demeanor, Teresa decided to trust her instincts. She offered a curt nod, still wary. Fine. Let's go. Side by side, they walked down the corridor, though the dynamic between them had irrevocably changed. Onlookers who had witnessed Harrington march Teresa out earlier now gawked in confusion at this new development. A few recognized Teresa's name from earlier announcements or from the local newspaper's coverage of her discrimination suit. Word was already spreading that something extraordinary had transpired. When they arrived at the courtroom, the tension inside was palpable. Lawyers, clerks, and the small audience snapped their attention to Teresa and Harrington. Judge Hessington was already seated, flipping through papers with an expression of forced composure. Rick Stanton stood at the plaintiff's table, relief and curiosity evident on his face. The opposing counsel appeared both confused and uneasy, as if blindsided. Judge Hessington cleared her throat. Miss Marshall, please take your seat, she said, gesturing toward the plaintiff's table. Gone was the harshness in her tone, it was replaced by a strained civility. "Mr. Stanton, you may proceed with introducing any new evidence relevant to the case." Rick opened his mouth, stunned by the sudden about-face. He quickly recovered though, and gestured for Teresa to sit beside him. Teresa's heart pounded as she stepped forward, mindful of every eye in the room fixed on her. This was a stark contrast from being ordered out just minutes before. Once settled, Rick leaned over and whispered, "What the heck happened?" Teresa whispered back, "I have no idea, but let's make the most of it." The judge looked at them both. "Counsel, you may continue." And so began the second act of a hearing that was now under the watchful eye of a power far beyond the courthouse walls. The possibility of genuine justice glimmered once again, and Teresa's heart soared at this unexpected chance to finally be heard. With renewed determination, Rick Stanton introduced the new set of emails into evidence. The overhead screens displayed messages that were undeniably racist in tone. The marketing firm's management seemed to single out Teresa, using coded language like "she might not be a fit for our clients" or referencing her urban style. One chain of messages revealed how her bonuses were downgraded with no explanation, while less qualified colleagues received promotions. The revelations stunned the courtroom. Even Judge Hassington, who had seemed indifferent before, appeared troubled by the blatant bias revealed. The opposing counsel sputtered, trying to object on grounds of relevance and authentication. However, Rick calmly laid out the digital trail of these emails, complete with metadata. The tension soared as every eye in the courtroom watched the timeline of discriminatory actions unfold. Teresa found herself in the unfamiliar position of having authority figures actually pay attention to her claims. She took a steadying breath before giving her statement. "This is not just about me," she began, voice trembling slightly. "It's about every employee who's been overlooked, underpaid, or mocked because of their race. These emails prove what I've been saying all along. They show a pattern of discrimination, and this pattern continues if no one stands up to it." The hush in the room was profound. Even the opposing counsel leaned back in his chair, losing the smug aura he'd carried earlier. He seemed to realize he was cornered, that these emails were more than just a minor inconvenience. They were a potential bombshell that could draw serious legal repercussions, extending beyond Teresa's individual case. Over the next hour, Rick meticulously presented the context around each email. He also presented testimonies from two of Teresa's former colleagues who had quietly submitted affidavits outlining similar experiences. While those colleagues feared retaliation, their words reinforced Teresa's claims, confirming a systematic practice of sidelining black employees. All the while, Teresa fought back a swirl of emotions: vindication, anger, relief, and weariness. This was what she'd spent months preparing for, yet she never imagined such a dramatic turn of events. She glanced once at Sergeant Harrington, who lingered near the back of the courtroom. Their eyes briefly met. He looked different now, as though he realized that he'd participated in something profoundly unjust earlier, even if inadvertently. Judge Hassington maintained a stoic expression, but her repeated notes and solemn nods suggested she was taking this evidence far more seriously than before. After the last email was displayed, she took a moment of silent reflection, then turned to the defense counsel. "Do you have any rebuttal at this time?" The defense lawyer stood up, shoulders visibly tight. We request a short recess to review these materials, Your Honor," he said, a tremor slipping into his usually confident tone. Hassington's gaze moved from the defense counsel to Teresa. "Very well. 30 minutes. Let's reconvene promptly afterward. We have much to discuss." She banged the gavel lightly, and the room exhaled collectively. Teresa slumped in her chair, relief and adrenaline warring in her body. Rick reached over and patted her hand. "We've got them on the ropes. Hang in there." As the lawyers began gathering their materials for the recess, Teresa felt her phone buzz softly. She pulled it out to see a message from a friend: "Turn on the news. Your case is making headlines." Something about a call from the White House. Teresa's eyes widened. She felt as though she'd been swept into an alternate reality. Just this morning, she was an ordinary citizen seeking justice. Now, she was in the center of a national storm, uncertain and hopeful in equal measure. During the recess, the the courthouse halls buzzed with speculation. Word had rapidly spread about the White House's involvement, though the details remained fuzzy. Some claimed the judge herself was being threatened with investigation if she didn't allow Teresa a fair shot. Others whispered that a high-ranking official had personally demanded the hearing proceed without bias. The more outlandish rumors suggested the president himself was on the phone, instructing the judge to do the right thing, though no one could confirm that. Teresa and Rick ducked into a quiet corner near the vending machines. They needed a moment to breathe and plan. Rick texted a few journalist contacts, verifying that the story had indeed reached a national audience. It seemed that someone had leaked Teresa's newly discovered evidence to news outlets, and the severe nature of the discrimination had caught the administration's attention. "This is a game changer," Rick murmured, glancing at the texts from reporters. "They're saying this could set a precedent for federal anti-discrimination enforcement." Teresa's heart pounded. "I never wanted to be in the spotlight like this." Rick gave her a kind, empathetic smile. "Sometimes the spotlight finds you. And if we play our cards right, you could help change a broken system." She lowered her gaze, thinking of Ava at home. Already, social media was ablaze. Teresa worried about her daughter reading hateful or personal comments, but if this was the price for uncovering injustice, Teresa was prepared to see it through. A voice from behind startled them both. "Excuse me," said Sergeant Harrington. He stood a few feet away, hands at his sides, the earlier tension in his posture less rigid. Teresa turned cautiously. "Yes?" He cleared his throat. "I wanted to say something." Rick looked at Teresa, ready to intervene if necessary. Harrington raised a hand in a placating gesture. "I just want to apologize. I was doing my job, but I realize now how it looked and how it felt for you, removing you like that." "I'm sorry." Teresa studied him, searching his eyes for sincerity. She saw no malice, just a complicated mixture of regret and discomfort. "I accept your apology," she said quietly, "but it doesn't undo what happened." Harrington gave a curt nod. "I know. I wanted you to know. Good luck in there." He turned to go, then stopped himself. "If it's any consolation, I didn't think they'd actually listen to you, but it looks like you got some powerful people on your side." Teresa didn't respond. She watched him retreat down the corridor, a sense of emotional turmoil following in his wake. Rick placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I told you, people can change or at least acknowledge when they're in the wrong. Let's just stay focused on the hearing, okay?" She nodded. The countdown to the next session began. They had only minutes to finalize their arguments, but the sudden wave of publicity and support from high places felt like a turning tide. For the first time in months, Teresa sensed the possibility of a true victory. The rest of the proceedings felt almost anticlimactic by comparison. The defense tried to salvage their position, suggesting that the emails were unrepresentative and that their client's general policy was inclusive. However, the damage was done. Judge Hessington scheduled a separate hearing to determine damages and possible injunctive relief. Meanwhile, the Department of Justice liaison requested that all records be submitted for potential federal review. When the gavel finally came down, declaring the session adjourned, Teresa sat back in her seat, physically and emotionally spent. Rick, beaming, wrapped an arm around her in a quick, congratulatory hug. "We did it," he whispered, though he knew the legal battle was far from over. Outside the courtroom, reporters with cameras and microphones swarmed. The case had exploded into public awareness, partly thanks to the White House's rumored phone call. Teresa, unaccustomed to the glare of media attention, tried to remain composed. Rick guided her through the crowd, offering statements about how this was a victory for civil rights and a wake-up call for corporations that still practice discriminatory policies. Teresa answered a few questions, her voice echoing across the cameras. "I just want justice, not only for myself, but for anyone else facing discrimination. I hope this encourages people to speak up." Her words reverberated across local news channels, quickly making their way to national broadcasts. People began to share their own stories of workplace bias, flooding social media with support for Teresa and condemnation of her former employer. Yet, behind the scenes, the marketing firm scrambled to contain the fallout, issuing statements that they do not tolerate discrimination and that they would conduct an internal investigation. Their stock began a downward spiral as consumer confidence wavered. Class action suits looked possible, maybe even likely. By mid-afternoon, Teresa was whisked into a conference room by Rick, who gently closed the door behind them to provide a moment of peace. "You okay?" he asked. She let out a shaky laugh. "I'm not sure. Today's been unreal. Did we really just have a DOJ observer show up and a phone call from the White House force the judge to let me speak?" Rick grinned, eyes shining with pride. "Yes, we did. Congratulations. You've made history in this courthouse and maybe beyond." Teresa dropped into a chair, exhaustion washing over her. She rubbed her temples, thinking of Ava, of the months of stress that had led to this moment. A wave of gratitude mingled with lingering disbelief. In that moment, Teresa realized something profound. Even when a system seems rigged, even when those in authority appear unmovable, the slightest spark, like a timely phone call or a piece of leaked evidence, can shift the balance of power. Her hope rekindled. She was not alone in the fight for justice, and neither were countless others facing discrimination. Later that evening, after the courthouse had emptied, Sergeant Kyle Harrington walked the quiet halls, locking up. His colleagues had left, and the usual hustle of daytime traffic was now replaced by a hush. The overhead lights flickered softly, revealing the building's age and the countless stories that played out in its rooms. Harrington paused near courtroom 306, remembering the scene from earlier. He had never seen such a dramatic reversal, nor had he felt so personally implicated. Something in him had shifted. Perhaps it was the sincere conviction in Teresa's eyes or the sobering power of the White House's intervention. He took out a small notebook and flipped through the pages filled with his day's notes: security checks, times people entered, times they left, the incident report on Teresa's removal. The more he thought about it, the heavier the guilt settled on his shoulders. He recalled the look on Teresa's face when he grabbed her arm. She hadn't been resisting, she was just desperate to be heard. A wave of disquiet rose in him. He had always prided himself on upholding the law, but in that moment, he'd become complicit in silencing a black woman who was simply fighting for her rights. Slipping the notebook back into his pocket, Harrington walked toward the exit, passing by the judge's chambers. The door was closed, but through the frosted glass, he could see the faint glow of a lamp. Perhaps the judge was still inside, grappling with the day's events. As he pushed open the heavy courthouse doors and stepped into the cool evening air, Harrington breathed in deeply. He stared at the purple-orange hues of the sunset, feeling more introspective than he had in years. A sudden vibration from his phone snapped him out of his reverie. It was a text from his wife. "Are you okay? The news is all over the courthouse case. Something about White House involvement." He typed back a brief reply: "I'm okay. Busy day. Let's talk when I get home." Then he stuffed his phone in his pocket and moved toward his car. He had a lot to think about. Maybe an apology was just the start of what he owed Teresa. Maybe there was more he could do in his position to ensure such injustices didn't happen on his watch. Change, sometimes, begins with a single step, a single moment of self-awareness. As he drove home, Harrington couldn't shake the feeling that he had crossed a threshold in his life. He could no longer plead ignorance or cling to neutrality. Whether he liked it or not, he had become part of a deeper story, one that demanded moral courage. In Washington, D.C., the corridors of power vibrated with their own brand of tension. White House Press Secretary Linda King stepped into the daily briefing room, filled with reporters eager to pounce on the morning's hot topics. The air conditioning fought against the heat of television lights, and the murmur of expectant voices settled as soon as Linda approached the podium. "Good morning," she began, scanning the crowd. "I'll take your questions now." Hands shot up, and Linda pointed to a reporter from the Associated Press. "Is it true that someone at the White House directly intervened in a local Maryland court case involving alleged racial discrimination?" the reporter asked, referencing Teresa's story. Linda kept her expression carefully neutral. "The administration, including the Department of Justice, is deeply committed to ensuring civil rights are protected across the nation. While I cannot comment on specific phone calls or communications, I can tell you that the federal government has the authority to investigate potential violations of civil rights law, even at the local level. A chorus of follow-up questions erupted. Another reporter from CNN pressed, "But are you confirming or denying that the White House directly contacted a judge regarding Teresa Marshall's case?" Linda paused, choosing her words wisely. "What I can say is that the administration has been made aware of Miss Marshall's situation, and we take any credible allegations of discrimination seriously. The Department of Justice has the mandate to oversee and ensure compliance with federal anti-discrimination laws." That wasn't exactly a denial. The room buzzed with speculation. Linda then pivoted to another topic, but the seed was planted. There had indeed been some form of high-level involvement. Later, in a quiet hallway away from the press, Linda passed a staffer who whispered, "We're getting hammered on that Teresa Marshall question." Linda nodded curtly. She was aware that open acknowledgement of direct judicial influence could be controversial, yet ignoring blatant discrimination was not an option for an administration that had campaigned on social justice. Somewhere behind the scenes, a staffer from the Civil Rights Division had recognized the significance of Teresa's case. Possibly, they had ties to an advocacy organization that forwarded the new evidence. In an administration that was particularly attuned to racial justice issues, it wasn't outlandish for them to pick up the phone and ensure due process wasn't trampled. As Linda King made her way back to her office, she couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The public might debate the appropriateness of White House involvement, but in her mind, letting a discrimination case go unexamined wasn't an option. Sometimes, the moral choice also carried political risks, and that was a trade-off the administration seemed willing to accept. In a sleek boardroom overlooking downtown Baltimore, executives from the marketing firm at the center of Teresa's lawsuit convened an emergency meeting. The polished mahogany table gleamed under the fluorescent lights, but the mood was anything but bright. The CEO, a silver-haired man with tired eyes, scrolled through a barrage of negative headlines on his tablet. "This has escalated out of control," he muttered, his voice echoing in the silent room. "Our stock dropped another 3 points this morning." A marketing VP cleared her throat. "We've prepared a media statement stressing our commitment to diversity and inclusion. We're also launching an internal investigation." A low scoff came from the company's legal counsel, seated at the far end of the table. "That might not be enough," he said, adjusting his glasses. "This case has the potential to open us up to a class action lawsuit. And with the Department of Justice looking in, we're exposed on all fronts." The CEO frowned, rubbing his temples. "What about an out-of-court settlement with Miss Marshall? Can we make this go away quietly?" The legal counsel shrugged. "Possibly. But she seems determined to see this through, especially with all the media attention. We'd have to offer a substantial sum and a formal apology, plus demonstrate real changes in our corporate structure." Another executive piped up. "We also have to consider the employees who are complaining on social media, saying they faced the same discrimination. This might not be a one-off. If we're not careful, we'll be fighting a dozen lawsuits." Tension mounted. For years, the company had gotten away with subtle biases, passing over certain employees for promotions, attributing failures to them more readily than to their white counterparts. It was a system so entrenched that most senior managers never questioned it. Now, the entire edifice was collapsing under the scrutiny that Teresa's lawsuit had brought. The CEO slammed his fist on the table, causing a pen to roll off. "We need damage control, and we need it now. Offer her a settlement. Make changes if we have to. Just fix this." Unbeknownst to him, a new wave of employees had already started drafting their own complaints. Teresa's courage and the dramatic events in court had emboldened them to come forward. The firm was on the brink of a seismic shift. While negotiations began behind the scenes, Teresa found unexpected allies rallying to her support. One was Melanie Cruz, a Latino woman who had once interned at the marketing firm under Teresa's supervision. She emailed Rick Stanton, describing how she had witnessed managers undermining Teresa. "She was the best mentor I ever had," Melanie wrote, "but they never gave her credit for her work. Instead, they ridiculed her ideas." Melanie volunteered to testify if needed, risking her own career prospects. Another ally emerged from an unlikely place, a current manager at the firm who claimed she was tired of the toxicity and was willing to speak out, even anonymously. Meanwhile, local civil rights groups organized a small rally outside the courthouse, holding signs that read "Equal work, equal respect." A speaker from the local NAACP chapter declared, "We stand with Teresa Marshall. This is not an isolated incident. This is a reflection of systemic injustice that must be corrected." Inside Teresa's modest home, Rick explained the developments to her. The company's lawyers are hinting at a settlement. They're also talking about an apology, but that might be more about PR. Teresa's mind whirled. Part of her wanted to settle, she was exhausted and financially strained, but another part urged her to hold out until real accountability was ensured. What if we push for structural changes, like a mandatory diversity audit or new policies to prevent this from happening again, she mused aloud. Rick nodded thoughtfully. We can definitely make that part of the negotiation. The firm is on the defensive. We have leverage. A pang of worry tightened in Teresa's chest. But what if they try to drag me through the mud, accuse me of wrongdoing? Rick gave her a reassuring smile. We have the evidence, and the White House involvement isn't a small thing. They're not going to risk a public spectacle that makes them look any worse. She let out a sigh. I never wanted any of this attention. But if we can help fix this broken system, it might be worth it. Just then, a text came in on Teresa's phone. Mom, you're trending again. Hashtag Teresa's victory is going viral. It was Ava, excitedly sharing the latest wave of social media posts praising Teresa's bravery. Some called her a modern Rosa Parks, though Teresa felt that was an exaggeration. Still, she couldn't deny that something big was shifting in the cultural landscape, and her case had become a flashpoint. Even the city's mayor tweeted support, saying her administration would collaborate with local businesses to review hiring practices. Teresa marveled at how a single person's fight could lead to a cascade of social and corporate re-examination. As the firm's internal investigation proceeded, shocking details surfaced. It turned out that the manager who had overseen Teresa's division had a history of making racially charged comments. He'd also manipulated performance reviews for other minority employees. HR records revealed numerous complaints that were quietly dismissed or never properly investigated. These revelations spelled disaster for the company's reputation and for that manager. While he had once wielded power with near impunity, the new spotlight forced the executives to take swift, decisive action. He was terminated within days, escorted out of the building just as Teresa had once been escorted out of the courtroom. The irony did not go unnoticed by employees, who whispered that karma had come full circle. As the manager packed up his belongings in a cardboard box, accompanied by security, he seethed with outrage. But public sentiment was overwhelmingly against him. Social media labeled him a textbook bigot, and calls for further accountability mounted. Even the local news ran a segment exposing his track record of discriminatory behavior. Meanwhile, the CEO wasn't spared from scrutiny either. Shareholders demanded explanations, and a group of major investors threatened to withdraw unless the company instituted a top-down review and replaced key leadership figures. The meltdown caused the board to convene multiple emergency sessions. In a matter of weeks, the once secure corporate power players found themselves on the defensive, forced to atone for years of veiled racism. This was the hard karma no one had expected when Teresa first filed her lawsuit. The system was punishing those who thought they could bypass accountability forever. Teresa sat in a polished conference room across from a team of the firm's lawyers. Rick Stanton was by her side, and the Department of Justice liaison observed via video call. The settlement negotiations had begun in earnest. The company's lead attorney cleared her throat. We're prepared to offer a substantial monetary settlement, as well as cover all of Ms. Marshall's legal fees. Rick exchanged a glance with Teresa. What about institutional reforms? He asked. The attorney pursed her lips. We can commit to a diversity audit and revise training programs. We're also drafting a formal apology. Teresa leaned forward. And how can we ensure this isn't just lip service? We need accountability measures, like quarterly reports on hiring and promotion practices, overseen by a third party. The attorney's face tightened. That's quite extensive. The DOJ liaison spoke up from the screen. Perhaps not, given the gravity of the evidence. External oversight might be warranted to ensure compliance with federal standards. The tension in the room soared. The firm's legal team conferred in hushed tones, scribbling notes. Teresa kept her gaze steady, her heart pounding. This was the moment that could shape not just her future, but the futures of many employees still at the firm. After a brief recess, the lead attorney returned with an amended proposal. It included a multi-million-dollar settlement, mandatory leadership shakeups, third-party oversight for at least 2 years, and a formal apology acknowledging discrimination had occurred. When Teresa and Rick reviewed the written draft, she felt tears well up. They were offering more than she had ever dreamed possible. Yet, the apology's language still felt passive and non-committal, phrases like regrettable circumstances and unintended bias. Teresa insisted on stronger language, pushing for an unequivocal admission of wrongdoing. The company lawyers balked at first, but with the DOJ and public scrutiny looming, they grudgingly relented. By the end of the marathon negotiation session, Teresa signed a historic settlement agreement that not only compensated her but also mandated systemic changes within the firm. When the final signature was inked, a wave of relief and triumph washed over her. She couldn't help but think back to that moment in the courtroom when Sergeant Harrington had marched her out, and she believed her case was doomed. Now, she held a legal document that symbolized a genuine step toward justice. The White House's involvement, the media attention, and her own steadfast resolve had all converged into this extraordinary outcome. When the news of the settlement broke, it dominated headlines. Most stories highlighted the unprecedented changes forced upon the company. Some called it a landmark victory, others, a wake-up call. Teresa found herself inundated with interview requests. She decided to share her story selectively, focusing on outlets that would give real insight into systemic discrimination rather than those seeking sensational soundbites. In the midst of the celebration, Sergeant Harrington reached out to Teresa, asking if they could meet. She was initially hesitant, but Rick encouraged her to listen. After all, their encounter in the courtroom had become a symbol of power misused and a turning tide. They agreed to meet at a small cafe near the courthouse. Harrington arrived in plain clothes, looking almost sheepish. Over a cup of coffee, he expressed his remorse. "I know my apology doesn't change what happened that day," he said, voice quiet, "but I wanted you to know that I've asked for a transfer to the Community Relations Unit. I want to do better." Teresa studied him for a moment. "Thank you for saying that," she replied, choosing her words carefully. "I appreciate you reaching out. I've learned this system is bigger than just one judge or one officer. We all have a part to play in changing it." Harrington nodded, relief evident in his eyes. They talked for a few more minutes about the changes the courthouse was undergoing, a new sensitivity training program, guidelines to avoid racial bias in judicial orders, including guidance for law enforcement officers inside courtrooms. When they parted ways, Teresa felt a weight lift. It wasn't forgiveness in the conventional sense, it was more a recognition that people could evolve, that redemption was possible. She believed true change required bridging these gaps, even if it started with difficult conversations like this. A week later, Teresa and Rick walked up the courthouse steps again, this time for a final hearing, a formality to enter the settlement into the record. The media presence was smaller now, but still present. A few fans cheered her on, holding signs like "Thank you, Teresa." Inside, Judge Hessington greeted her with a restrained nod. The judge seemed more guarded in the wake of the controversy, yet there was also a hint of respect in her eyes. This wasn't the same woman Hessington had dismissed weeks ago. Now, Teresa was someone recognized nationwide for fighting injustice. The hearing was brief. The judge asked if both parties had agreed to the settlement terms. The defense counsel replied affirmatively. Rick stated, "We are satisfied with the terms, Your Honor." Judge Hessington's gaze flicked to Teresa. "Miss Marshall, do you feel this settlement adequately addresses your concerns?" Teresa inhaled deeply, memories flashing, her forced removal, her tears of frustration, the glimmer of hope, the unstoppable chain of events leading to a call from the White House. "Yes, Your Honor," she said. "I believe it's a step toward real justice." A soft murmur rippled through the courtroom. Hessington nodded solemnly. "Then it is so ordered." She banged the gavel once, and just like that, the case that had consumed Teresa's life came to a close. Reporters outside bombarded Teresa with questions, but she kept her statements simple. "I'm grateful the truth finally came to light, and I hope this encourages others to speak up. This victory isn't just for me, it's for everyone fighting against discrimination." Her words echoed in the crisp air as she walked down the courthouse steps, feeling lighter than she had in months. This was more than a personal victory, it was a testament to the power of perseverance, the importance of allies, and the unpredictable ways in which justice could be served. In the weeks that followed, Teresa's life returned to a semblance of normalcy, though forever changed. She received countless messages from people inspired by her courage. She also spent more time with Ava, ensuring her daughter understood the significance of what had transpired. The marketing firm began implementing the policies outlined in the settlement. Early reports showed increased transparency in hiring and promotion practices. An independent watchdog was appointed to ensure compliance. Employees stepped forward with renewed optimism. Teresa, for her part, decided to start a small consultancy, advising companies on fostering genuinely inclusive environments. With Rick's help, she set up a framework to offer training, workshops, and auditing services. Former classmates, colleagues, and even employees from her old marketing firm reached out for guidance. One rainy afternoon, as she reviewed some documents at her kitchen table, Teresa received a letter in official correspondence from the Department of Justice. Inside, she found a commendation for her role in exposing systemic discrimination, signed by a high-ranking official. The letter thanked her for making workplaces across the nation more equitable and just. Tears welled in Teresa's eyes as she read. This acknowledgement felt surreal. She thought back to the quiet dread of the courtroom hallway, the searing humiliation of being removed. Now, it all seemed like part of a larger tapestry, a journey that proved even the most entrenched systems can be challenged. Outside, the rain clouds parted to reveal a slice of sunlight. A rainbow arched over the neighborhood. Teresa smiled, taking it as a sign of hope. She closed the letter, setting it gently atop the settlement papers, a symbol of how far she'd come. And so ends the remarkable tale of a single voice, once silenced, then amplified by the highest reaches of power to achieve justice, not only for herself, but for countless others who might otherwise remain unheard. Thank you for joining us on this extraordinary journey with Adam Alpha. Teresa Marshall's battle began as a single discrimination case, buried in a crowded courthouse, but it exploded into a national story that rattled corporate offices and even found an echo in the White House. From her forced removal by a skeptical police officer to the game-changing intervention from Washington, Teresa's resilience and moral courage transformed her life and countless others. She showed us that when you stand firm in the truth, the ripples can move mountains. If this story inspired you or made you think differently about justice, be sure to let us know by liking, sharing, and subscribing to Adam Alpha. You help more people learn about stories like Teresa's and spark real-world change. So, hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and share this video with your friends. Together, we can create a more equitable future for everyone.